You've seen them 100 times at the zoo, pressed against the glass, on your feed, wearing sunglasses, riding a bicycle, doing something almost human enough to make you laugh. Almost human is exactly the problem. Primates are responsible for more unpredictable, high-severity attacks on humans than almost any other family of animals on Earth. Not because they're mindless, but because they're smart enough to plan, strong enough to follow through, and familiar enough that nobody sees it coming until it's already happening. That familiarity is the whole trap. Here's the myth you've probably heard, and it's wrong in an interesting way. For a century, the story was that a chimpanzee is 5 to 8 times stronger than a grown man, practically superhuman. In 2017, researchers at the University of Arizona finally tested it properly, simulating chimp and human muscle fiber under identical conditions. The real number is 1.5 times stronger, pound for pound. Not superhuman, just more. Except a chimp weighs a third of what you do. A 1.5 times strength advantage packed into a 100-pound frame with a lower center of gravity and joints built for climbing does not feel like 1.5 times anything once its hands are on you. The myth was wrong about the number. It was right about the outcome. And that's just one species in a family that includes several others. Most people have never once considered dangerous. Start with the one tourist's photograph without a second thought: the baboon. In Cape Town, several dozen troops of chacma baboons, likely numbering somewhere in the low thousands across the peninsula, live directly alongside residents and millions of annual visitors, foraging through neighborhoods, cars, and picnic tables with the casual confidence of an animal that has stopped being afraid of you. Adult males can weigh close to 90 pounds and reach speeds that outrun a sprinting human over short distances, with canine teeth longer than a lion's relative to their skull size. Built originally for fighting rival males, perfectly capable of opening a human arm to the bone. In October 2006, a British tourist named Gillian Burgess, 37, was sitting beside her rental car at Cape Point with her 5-year-old son, Ellis, when she noticed a baboon a few meters away and told her son to get in. She climbed into the front seat herself and heard the back door open behind her, assuming it was Ellis climbing in too. It wasn't. The baboon had gotten into the back seat, and when she turned around, it bit down on her hip and tore her shirt before she could get clear. Her son fled across the road, watching in horror. Burgess said afterward she hadn't done anything to provoke it. No food, no threat, nothing she could point to. That's the part park rangers keep repeating to visitors who don't want to hear it. You don't need to do anything wrong. An animal that has learned humans are an unreliable source of food and zero source of real danger will eventually test that theory on somebody, and there's no way to know in advance who that somebody will be. Cape Town has spent nearly 2 decades trying to manage that reality without simply eliminating it. Since 2006, a dedicated research unit has tracked troops with GPS collars, and teams of human monitors patrol known routes daily, using shouts, clapping, and paintball guns to steer baboons away from residential streets before they reach a parked car or an open kitchen window. It mostly works, but baboons habituate to almost anything, including the monitors themselves, and every so often, a specific individual gets bold enough or hungry enough that officials decide it can no longer be safely deterred and euthanize it, a step nobody takes lightly, precisely because the animal isn't doing anything an intelligent, opportunistic omnivore wouldn't do in the same situation. The situation has just come to include several 100,000 humans. Then there's the primate most people can't even correctly identify, the mandrill. Thanks to Rafiki in a certain animated movie, most people call this animal a baboon on sight. It isn't. It's a separate, distinct species, the largest monkey on Earth, full stop, and it is built like nothing else in this family. A male mandrill's canine teeth reach up to 2.5 inches long, comparable in raw length to a full-grown lion's, mounted in the mouth of an animal that weighs a fraction of what a lion weighs. pound for pound, nothing else in the primate world is carrying a weapon that disproportionate. Mandrills are usually described as shy forest omnivores, and mostly that's true. But researchers working in Cameroon documented something that doesn't fit the gentle fruit eater image at all: a coordinated mandrill hunting party. An adult male and female working together, taking down and consuming a bay duiker, a small forest antelope, in the wild. Not scavenging, hunting. That kind of coordination shouldn't be possible for an animal most people assume is a solitary forest grazer, but it fits everything else researchers have documented about mandrill social intelligence. The same vivid red and blue facial and rump coloration that makes them instantly recognizable in a nature documentary doubles as a rank and mood signal, legible at a distance. It brightens with testosterone and social status, and fades in subordinate males who'd rather not be noticed at all. It's a communication system built for exactly the kind of enormous, visually chaotic group a horde of over 1,000 animals would otherwise struggle to coordinate, and they don't move through the forest alone. Mandrill troops merge into what researchers call hordes, and the largest ever documented numbered over 1,200 individuals in a single moving group. The biggest aggregation of any primate species ever recorded, anywhere. Picture that number moving through dense equatorial forest, using thick vegetation and dazzling color patterns to track each other at distances where a human would see nothing but green. It is, by a wide margin, the least understood dangerous animal in this entire video, and possibly the one most people would least expect to make this list at all. Now, the one most people think they already understand, because they've seen the viral photo, the gentle giant, the gorilla. That image exists almost entirely because of captivity. Decades of calm zoo footage, silverbacks lounging near glass. The internet's fascination with gorillas that recognize their old handlers. What that footage doesn't show you is what happens in the handful of seconds when that calm ends. On May 18, 2007, at Diergaard Blijdorp Zoo in Rotterdam, a western lowland gorilla named Bokito leapt across a 3.5-meter, water-filled ditch, a gap zoo designers had assumed no gorilla could clear, and went straight for a woman standing in the crowd. Her name was Petronella Yvonne de Hoorde, 57 years old, a regular visitor who believed she had built a personal bond with him over years of visits, smiling and making prolonged eye contact through the glass. Zookeepers later explained what that eye contact actually meant to Bokito: a direct challenge, not a greeting. He dragged her for dozens of meters across the zoo grounds, bit her more than 100 times, and broke multiple bones before continuing on into a nearby restaurant, where he injured 3 more people before he was finally sedated. De Hoorde required dozens of reconstructive surgeries afterward. She told reporters from her hospital bed that he was still her favorite animal. None of that even required a gorilla's maximum output. Estimates put an adult male gorilla's bite force at over 1,300 pounds per square inch, easily enough to crush bone on the first bite. Bokito mostly used his weight and his hands, not his jaws. The rest was simply sitting there in reserve, behind decades of calm zoo footage. And gorilla aggression toward humans isn't always straightforwardly hostile, which makes it harder to predict, not easier. In 2016, a Cincinnati Zoo silverback named Harambe grabbed a 3-year-old boy who'd fallen into his enclosure and dragged him through a moat for about 10 minutes before zoo staff shot him. Video of the encounter showed moments that looked almost protective alongside moments that looked violent, and primatologists who reviewed the footage afterward couldn't agree on which impulse was driving him. The zoo decided it couldn't afford to wait and find out. The word that came out of that single incident, Bokito-proof, meaning built to withstand exactly this kind of escape, was voted Word of the Year in the Netherlands. That's how completely it reshaped how zoos there thought about containment. A 3.5-meter gap was assumed to be an uncrossable safety margin. It wasn't a margin at all. It was just a distance nobody had bothered to test. Which brings us to the primate this entire video has been circling. The one this channel's audience already knows better than almost any other animal we've covered. The chimpanzee. Travis had been a minor local celebrity for most of his life. He'd appeared in television commercials for national brands and once turned up on a daytime talk show, the kind of animal actor resume that made his owner's claims about his gentle temperament easy to believe. On February 16, 2009, in Stamford, Connecticut, that 200-pound chimpanzee, raised in a private home since infancy, dressed in human clothes, known to neighbors as a member of the family, attacked a family friend named Charla Nash when she arrived at the house at his owner's request. Travis tore away her hands, her nose, her lips, and both eyes before police finally arrived and shot him. Nash survived, permanently and catastrophically disfigured, and later received one of the first full face transplants ever performed in the United States. Travis had lived in that house for 14 years. He had bitten 2 people in minor incidents years earlier and once escaped into downtown traffic for a few hours. But nothing close to this scale, and nothing that made anyone in the household treat him as genuinely dangerous. Toxicology later showed Travis had the anti-anxiety drug Xanax in his system that day, given to him by his owner, who said he'd seemed unusually agitated. But the explanation that stuck with the public was smaller and stranger. Harold herself later speculated that Travis may have simply failed to recognize Nash. She'd arrived in an unfamiliar car, with a different hairstyle, holding a stuffed Elmo toy up in front of her face as a gift for him. And by the time he realized who she was, if he ever did, it was already over. 14 years of trust, undone by a car he didn't recognize, and a face he couldn't place. Here's what should genuinely unsettle you more than any single attack in this video. Between 1974 and 1978, primatologist Jane Goodall documented something in Gombe Stream National Park, Tanzania, that no scientist had ever formally recorded before: a war. A single chimpanzee community had split into 2 rival factions, the Kasakala and the Kahama, and over the following 4 years, Kasakala males carried out a sustained campaign of coordinated ambushes against their former groupmates. They patrolled the border of Kahama territory in silent hunting parties. They isolated lone individuals. They held victims down while multiple attackers bit, struck, and stamped on them for as long as 10 minutes at a time. Goodall's own field notes from those years describe specific individuals she had watched grow up turning on former groupmates with a coordination that looked deliberate rather than frenzied, one male pinning a rival down while others attacked, in at least one case reportedly drinking blood from a wound they'd just opened. These weren't chance encounters between strangers. Every victim had spent years grooming, sharing food, and traveling alongside his eventual killers, and that same familiarity became a hunting advantage once the split turned violent. The attackers already knew exactly how each victim would try to run. By the end, every adult male in the Kahama community was dead, and the Kasakila had taken their entire territory. Goodall herself struggled publicly with what she'd witnessed, writing later that she had spent years believing chimpanzees were, if anything, gentler than humans, and that Gombe forced her to accept they had a capacity for premeditated, sustained group violence that looked disturbingly like something out of our own history. Other scientists at the time accused her of projecting human concepts onto animal behavior. Decades of subsequent research, using less intrusive observation methods on other wild chimpanzee populations, confirmed the same pattern exists elsewhere. It wasn't an anomaly caused by her presence. It was simply the first time anyone had stayed close enough, long enough, to see it. None of this is confined to famous one-off cases either. The primates most likely to seriously injure a human usually aren't the ones living wild in a forest or reserve. They're the ones living in somebody's house, marketed and sold as pets, raised on baby formula and dressed in toddler clothes until they're strong enough to end a relationship in seconds. Sanctuaries that take in unwanted chimps and macaques report the same pattern over and over, an animal that seemed perfectly socialized for years, right up until it wasn't. Usually around the exact age, it would have started asserting itself in a wild social hierarchy. It never had the chance to grow up inside. It's the question Gombe leaves you with, and it still doesn't have a clean answer. Were these chimpanzees so human, Or are we so animal? 4 different primates, 4 completely different bodies, ranges, and reputations. A baboon that's learned to stop fearing your picnic table. A mandrill most people can't even correctly name. A gorilla whose gentleness is mostly something we invented in captivity. A chimpanzee capable, under the right, unknowable circumstances, of coordinated, sustained violence against its own kind. What connects all 4 isn't strength, or teeth, or speed. It's intelligence paired with social memory. The capacity to recognize you, to test you, to decide, sometimes over years of apparent calm, that today is the day that calm ends. You've seen them 100 times, at the zoo, on your feed, almost human. That's still exactly the problem.